the encounter with two. I'll never forget that fateful night in the woods. The full moon hung heavy in the inky black sky, its pale light filtering through the twisted branches of the ancient trees. A chill ran down my spine as I trekked along the narrow dirt path, my boots crunching on the carpet of fallen leaves. I cursed under my breath, regretting my decision to take this shortcut through the forest. The eerie silence pressed in on me from all sides, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the snapping of a twig underfoot. My heart pounded in my chest as I quickened my pace, desperate to reach the safety of the town on the other side before nightfall. That's when I heard it, a bone-chilling howl that seemed to pierce the very depths of my soul. It was a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard before, a primal, guttural cry that sent shivers racing down my spine. I froze in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat as I strained to hear any other sound that might betray the presence of the creature that had uttered that haunting call. Silence. Then, another howl, closer this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of something large and heavy crashing through the underbrush. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I was hearing. A wolf, perhaps? But no, the howls were too deep, too guttural, too inhuman. I broke into a run, my heart pounding in my ears as I tore down the path, heedless of the branches that whipped at my face and tore at my clothes. Behind me, the crashing grew louder, closer, as if whatever was pursuing me was rapidly gaining ground. I burst into a small clearing, the moonlight bathing the open space in an otherworldly glow. Gasping for breath, I spun around, searching for any sign of my pursuer. The forest was deathly still, the only sound the frantic pounding of my heart. Then, a low growl rumbled from the shadows at the edge of the clearing, and a massive figure emerged into the moonlight. I stumbled back, my eyes widening in horror as I took in the creature before me. It stood easily 7 feet tall, its muscular frame covered in coarse, matted fur. Elongated claws extended from its massive paws, and its muzzle was twisted into a snarl, revealing rows of razor-sharp fangs. A werewolf. The stuff of nightmares and legends, yet here it stood before me, very much real and very much a threat. The beast let out another earth-shattering howl, its yellow eyes fixed on me with an almost hungry intensity. I fumbled for the hunting knife at my belt, my trembling fingers finally closing around the hilt as the werewolf began to advance. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. "I'm warning you!" The werewolf seemed unfazed by my threat, its lips curling back in a feral snarl as it crouched low, preparing to pounce. In that moment, time seemed to slow to a crawl. I could see every rippling muscle, every strand of coarse fur, every glint of moonlight reflecting off those wicked claws. The werewolf tensed, and then it sprang, hurtling towards me with impossible speed and ferocity. I don't know how, but I managed to dive out of the way just in time, the werewolf's claws raking through the air where I'd been standing mere moments before. I rolled across the forest floor, clutching my knife tightly as I scrambled to my feet. The beast whirled around, its yellow eyes burning with fury as it fixed me with a murderous glare. A low, rumbling growl emanated from deep within its chest, and it began to stalk towards me, its movements fluid and predatory. I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs as I tried to formulate a plan. Running was out of the question. This creature was far too fast, and it would run me down in seconds. My only hope was to fight, to somehow find a way to incapacitate or kill this unholy abomination. The werewolf lunged again, its massive jaws snapping shut mere inches from my face. I lashed out with my knife, the blade slicing through fur and flesh as I scored a glancing blow across the beast's shoulder. It recoiled with a howl of pain and rage, its eyes burning with a newfound fury. Before I could react, it swung one of its massive paws, catching me across the chest and sending me flying backwards. I slammed into the trunk of a tree, the wind knocked out of me as I crumpled to the ground, gasping for air. The werewolf advanced, its lips curled back in a snarl as it prepared to deliver the killing blow. I clutched my knife, my knuckles white with the effort, and braced myself for the end. But then, something unexpected happened. A deafening roar split the night, echoing through the forest like a thunderclap. The werewolf froze, its head whipping around as another massive figure emerged from the tree line. My eyes widened in disbelief as I took in the newcomer. It was another werewolf, even larger and more imposing than the first. Its fur was a deep, russet red, and its eyes burned with an almost otherworldly intensity. The two beasts faced each other, growling and snarling as they circled one another, their claws leaving deep gouges in the earth. The red werewolf let out another ear-splitting roar, a challenge that seemed to shake the very foundations of the forest. The first werewolf responded with a howl of its own, and then the two titans collided in a clash of fur and fangs. They grappled and tore at each other, their howls and roars echoing through the night as they fought with a savagery that defied description. I watched, transfixed, as the battle raged on, the two werewolves locked in a deadly dance of violence and bloodshed. Suddenly, the red werewolf gained the upper hand, its powerful jaws clamping down on the throat of its opponent. With a sickening crunch, it tore the other werewolf's head from its shoulders, spraying the clearing with a fountain of black ichor. The red werewolf stood over the lifeless corpse of its fallen foe, its chest heaving as it let out a triumphant howl that seemed to shake the very heavens. Then, it turned its burning gaze towards me, and I felt my blood run cold. I scrambled backwards, my heart pounding in my throat as the massive beast advanced on me. This was it, I thought. This was how I was going to die, torn apart by the claws and fangs of a creature straight out of my worst nightmares. But as the werewolf drew closer, something strange happened. Its eyes, which had burned with such feral intensity mere moments ago, seemed to soften, taking on an almost human quality. It stopped just a few feet away from me, its massive head cocked to one side as it regarded me with an expression that almost seemed curious. Slowly, cautiously, I rose to my feet, my knife still clutched tightly in my trembling hand. The werewolf made no move to attack, simply watching me with those piercing, intelligent eyes. What are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The werewolf didn't respond, at least not in any way I could understand. It simply continued to study me, its gaze unwavering. Then, to my utter astonishment, the creature began to change. Before my very eyes, its form seemed to shift and contort, its fur receding and its features becoming more human. Within moments, the towering werewolf had been replaced by a man, a tall, powerfully built man with piercing blue eyes and a shock of fiery red hair. He regarded me with a calm, almost serene expression, as if he hadn't just been locked in a life-or-death battle with another supernatural creature. "I am many things," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "A protector, a guardian, a werewolf, as you would call it." I stared at him, my mind reeling as I tried to process what I had just witnessed. A werewolf, a real, living, breathing werewolf, stood before me, and yet he seemed almost human. How is this possible?" I stammered, my grip tightening on my knife as a fresh wave of fear washed over me. The man, if he could truly be called that, regarded me with a patient expression. "There is much about this world that you do not understand," he said. "Creatures and forces that lurk just beyond the veil of human perception, hidden from your kind for centuries." He gestured to the lifeless corpse of the other werewolf, its glassy eyes staring sightlessly at the night sky. "That was a rogue, a beast driven by pure instinct and bloodlust. It is my duty, my purpose, to hunt down such creatures and protect the innocent from their wrath." I shook my head, struggling to wrap my mind around what he was telling me. "But you're a werewolf too," I said. "How can you be any different?" The man's expression hardened, and for a moment, I caught a glimpse of the feral power that lurked beneath his human facade. "I am not a mindless beast," he growled. "I am a guardian, a protector of the natural order. My kind has walked this earth for millennia, keeping the darkness at bay and ensuring that the balance is maintained." He took a step towards me, and I instinctively flinched back, my heart pounding in my chest. But there was no malice in his movements, no hint of the savage violence I had witnessed mere moments ago. "You have been granted a rare glimpse into a world that few mortals ever see," he said, his voice low and intense. "What you choose to do with this knowledge is up to you. But know this, the darkness is ever present, lurking in the shadows and preying on the unwary. And we, the Guardians, are all that stand between your kind and oblivion." I stood there, rooted to the spot, as the man, the werewolf, turned and melted back into the shadows of the forest. His words echoed in my mind, a stark reminder that the world was a far stranger and more dangerous place than I could have ever imagined. For a long time, I remained in that clearing, staring at the lifeless corpse of the rogue werewolf and trying to make sense of what I had just experienced. Part of me wanted to dismiss it all as some sort of fever dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion or fear. But deep down, I knew that what I had witnessed was all too real. Eventually, as the first hints of dawn began to creep over the horizon, I gathered my courage and made my way out of the forest, my mind still reeling from the events of the night. In the days and weeks that followed, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting to catch a glimpse of that towering, red-furred figure lurking in the shadows. I scoured every book and website I could find, desperate for any scrap of information about werewolves and the so-called guardians that the man had spoken of. But there was precious little to be found, at least in the realm of concrete facts and evidence. Myths and legends abounded, of course, but nothing that could truly shed light on the existence of these creatures or the role they played in the world. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been granted a rare glimpse into a hidden world, a realm of shadows and secrets that lay just beyond the veil of human perception. And as the years passed, that feeling only grew stronger. It was nearly a decade later when I encountered the werewolf again. I had long since given up my search for answers, resigning myself to the fact that some mysteries were simply meant to remain unsolved. I had settled into a quiet life in a small town, far removed from the hustle and bustle of the city and the constant reminders of that fateful night in the woods. But then, one evening, as I was taking my usual stroll through the local park, I heard a sound that sent a chill racing down my spine, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to emanate from the very depths of the earth itself. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as memories of that night came flooding back. Slowly, cautiously, I turned towards the source of the sound, half expecting to see a pair of glowing eyes peering at me from the shadows. What I saw instead was far worse. A massive, hulking figure emerged from the tree line, its form twisted and distorted into something that could only be described as nightmarish. It stood easily 10 feet tall, its body a grotesque amalgamation of human and animal features, with elongated limbs and a maw filled with razor-sharp fangs. It fixed me with a baleful glare, its eyes burning with an unholy light as it let out another bone-chilling growl. I stumbled backwards, my mind reeling as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. This was no ordinary werewolf. This was something else entirely, something far more ancient and malevolent. As the creature advanced, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. A figure stepped out from behind a nearby tree, and my heart leapt into my throat as I recognized the tall, powerfully built form of the red-haired werewolf from all those years ago. He regarded the monstrous creature with a grim expression, his eyes narrowed and his jaw set in a hard line. Then, without warning, he let out a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. The creature recoiled, its twisted features contorting in what almost looked like fear. But it quickly regained its composure, letting out a guttural snarl as it turned its attention towards the werewolf. What happened next was a blur of motion and violence that defied description. The two titans collided with earth-shattering force, their bodies slamming together in a clash of muscle and bone. They grappled and tore at each other, their roars and howls echoing through the night like the cries of damned souls. I watched, transfixed, as the battle raged on, unable to tear my eyes away from the savage spectacle unfolding before me. The werewolf fought with a ferocity and skill that was almost mesmerizing, his movements fluid and precise as he dodged and countered the creature's relentless onslaught. But the creature was no mere mindless beast, it possessed a cunning and intelligence that belied its monstrous form. Time and again, it would anticipate the werewolf's attacks, countering with devastating blows that seemed to shake the very earth. As the battle wore on, I could see the werewolf beginning to tire, his movements growing sluggish and labored. The creature, sensing its advantage, redoubled its efforts, raining down blow after blow upon its opponent. Finally, with a sickening crunch, the werewolf was sent crashing to the ground, his body battered and broken. The creature loomed over him, its twisted maw splitting into a grotesque parody of a grin as it prepared to deliver the killing blow. In that moment, something inside me snapped. Without thinking, I charged forward, my heart pounding in my ears as I rushed towards the towering creature. It turned towards me, its eyes burning with malevolent fury, and let out a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. But I didn't falter, didn't slow my pace. With a primal scream of my own, I hurled myself at the creature, my body slamming into its massive form with all the force I could muster. It staggered back, caught off guard by my sudden attack, and I seized the opportunity to press my advantage. I rained down blow after blow, my fists pummeling its twisted flesh as I poured every ounce of rage and fear and adrenaline into my assault. The creature roared and thrashed, its massive limbs flailing as it tried to dislodge me. But I held on with a tenacity born of pure desperation, my mind focused solely on the task of survival. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the creature's struggles began to weaken. Its roars grew fainter, its movements more sluggish, until at last it collapsed to the ground with a thunderous crash. I stood there, panting and trembling, my knuckles bloody and raw from the onslaught. For a long moment, I simply stared at the creature's lifeless form, unable to fully comprehend what I had just done. My encounter on Bray Road. The autumn chill hung heavy in the night air as I navigated my truck down the desolate stretch of Bray Road. The narrow country lane cut through the dense forests and rolling hills of Walworth County, far removed from the lights and sounds of civilization. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, peering intently through the windshield as my high beams cut through the inky darkness. This remote area had been the site of numerous alleged werewolf sightings over the years, earning it a reputation as one of the most haunted roads in America. Of course, I was a skeptic by nature. The rational, scientific part of my mind dismissed such tales as nothing more than urban legends and overactive imaginations. But there was another part of me, a part that still clung to a sense of childhood wonder, that couldn't help but be intrigued by the possibilities. That's why I found myself out here on this chilly October night, driving the lonely stretch of Bray Road in search of, what, exactly? Some definitive proof that the legends were true? A glimpse into a world that defied all logical explanation? A thrill, an adrenaline rush to break the monotony of my mundane existence? I shook my head, chuckling to myself at the absurdity of it all. Still, I pressed on, my curiosity, or perhaps my foolishness, getting the better of me. As I rounded a sharp bend in the road, something caught my eye, a massive, hulking figure standing in the middle of the lane up ahead. I slammed on the brakes, my tires skidding across the loose gravel as the truck lurched to a stop mere feet away from the figure. My heart pounded in my chest as I squinted through the windshield, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. At first, I thought it might be a bear, but as the creature stepped into the pale glow of my headlights, I felt my blood turn to ice in my veins. It stood easily 8 feet tall on its hind legs, its body a grotesque amalgamation of human and animal. Thick, coarse fur covered its muscular frame, and wicked claws extended from its elongated hands and feet. But it was the creature's face that struck the most primal chord of fear, a twisted, elongated muzzle filled with razor-sharp fangs, and eyes that burned with a feral, unholy light. A werewolf. The stuff of nightmares and campfire tales, yet here it stood before me, very much real and very much a threat. The beast let out a guttural growl that seemed to reverberate through the very earth itself, its lips curling back in a snarl as it fixed me with its baleful glare. I fumbled for the hunting rifle I kept stashed behind the seat, my hands trembling as I tried to load a round into the chamber. But the werewolf was faster. In the blink of an eye, it had closed the distance between us, its massive form slamming into the side of the truck with enough force to rock the entire vehicle. I was thrown sideways, the rifle clattering to the floor as the werewolf's claws raked across the metal door, leaving deep gouges in their wake. I scrambled across the bench seat, desperately trying to put as much distance between myself and the creature as possible. But it was relentless, snarling and snapping as it battered against the truck, each blow shaking the vehicle violently. In a moment of sheer desperation, I threw the truck into reverse and slammed my foot down on the gas pedal. The tires spun wildly, kicking up a cloud of gravel and dust before finally finding purchase. The truck lurched backwards, narrowly avoiding the werewolf's grasping claws as it tore away from the creature's reach. I didn't stop driving until I had put miles between myself and that godforsaken stretch of road, my heart still pounding and my hands shaking violently on the steering wheel. Only when the familiar lights of town appeared on the horizon did I finally allow myself to breathe a ragged sigh of relief. But even as I pulled into the driveway of my house, I could still see the image of that monstrous beast burned into my mind's eye. The glowing eyes, the twisted muzzle filled with fangs, the sheer, unholy power radiating from its massive frame. Part of me wanted nothing more than to dismiss the whole experience as some sort of fever dream, a hallucination brought on by fatigue or fear. But I knew deep down that what I had encountered on Bray Road that night was all too real. I had glimpsed a world that existed just beyond the boundaries of human perception, a realm of ancient secrets and primal forces where the line between myth and reality had become blurred. In the days and weeks that followed, I found myself obsessively researching the legends and lore surrounding Bray Road and its supposed connection to the supernatural. I pored over accounts from others who claimed to have witnessed similar creatures stalking the desolate country lanes, searching for any shred of evidence that might corroborate my own harrowing experience. What I uncovered only deepened the mystery. Stories dating back centuries told of shape-shifting beasts that roamed the forests and hills of the area, preying on the unwary and leaving a trail of mutilated corpses in their wake. Native American legends spoke of cursed lands and dark spirits that could take on the form of fearsome, wolf-like monsters. The more I delved into the lore, the more I began to question the very nature of reality itself. Could it be possible that these creatures, these werewolves, were more than just myths and campfire tales? Could they be some sort of interdimensional beings, slipping between the boundaries of our world and another darker realm? Or perhaps they were something even more ancient and primordial, remnants of a time before humanity's dominance, when the world was ruled by savage, primal forces that we could scarcely comprehend. I knew that I should have been terrified by the implications of what I had witnessed, by the notion that such unholy abominations could exist in the shadows, just beyond the reach of human perception. But instead, I found myself consumed by an insatiable curiosity, a burning desire to unravel the mysteries that surrounded these creatures and the world they inhabited. It was this obsession that drove me back to Bray Road time and again, venturing out under the cover of darkness with an array of cameras and recording equipment, determined to capture definitive proof of the werewolf's existence. Night after night, I would stake out the desolate country lanes, my senses on high alert for any sign of movement, any sound that might betray the presence of one of those unholy beasts. And while I never encountered another werewolf directly, there were times when I could have sworn I caught glimpses of movement in the shadows, or heard the faint echo of a bone-chilling howl carried on the wind. Perhaps it was merely my mind playing tricks on me, conjuring phantoms born of my own fears and desires. Or perhaps there was something more to it, something ancient and unknowable, lurking just beyond the reach of human comprehension. All I knew for certain was that my life would never be the same after that fateful night on Bray Road. The veil had been lifted, if only for a moment, and I had been granted a terrifying glimpse into a world of shadows and secrets. A world where the line between myth and reality had become hopelessly blurred, and where the darkness was always waiting, just out of sight, for those foolish enough to go seeking answers to questions that were perhaps better left unasked. The Hunters. The full moon cast an eerie glow over the forest as the hunting party made their way down the overgrown trail. 6 men, all grizzled outdoorsmen and experienced hunters, made up the group. They were in pursuit of a legendary creature, one whose existence had been hotly debated in these woods for centuries. "You boys sure you want to keep going?" Old Jim Harding called out, slowing his pace to let the others catch up. "We're getting awfully deep in the Black Hills here. You getting scared of the boogeyman, Harding?" One of the younger men chuckled, slapping the old hunter on the shoulder. "Thought you'd have grown out of that by now." Jim shot him a withering look. "I'm just saying, if the stories about this thing are true, maybe we're the ones being hunted instead of the other way around." The group pressed on in silence for a while, the only sounds being their boots crunching on the fallen leaves and branches. As the moon reached its peak, they emerged into a small clearing ringed by twisted, gnarled oak trees. That's when they heard a deep, guttural growl that seemed to reverberate from all directions at once. The hunters immediately fanned out, rifles at the ready as they scanned the tree line. "Steady, boys," Jim cautioned under his breath. "Whatever made that noise, it's close." A twig snapped from the tree lean to their right. All 6 rifles swiveled as one towards the source of the sound. For a few tense moments, nothing moved except the gentle rustling of leaves in the wind. Then it emerged, a massive, hunched figure easily 8 feet tall, covered in coarse fur the color of gunmetal gray. As it stepped into the moonlight, the creature's face was thrown into sharp relief, a grotesque, elongated snout filled with dagger-like fangs, and eyes that glowed with a feral, predatory intensity. "Sweet Jesus!" one of the hunters gasped. "It's real!" The werewolf opened its massive jaws, letting out a deafening roar that shook the trees around them. It took a few lumbering steps forward, seemingly unfazed by the men training their weapons on it. "Everybody hold your fire!" Jim barked. Maybe they could scare this thing off without having to. His words were cut off as the werewolf charged, closing the distance with terrifying speed. The hunters opened fire, the clearing erupting in thunderous booms of gunfire. But the bullets seemed to have no effect, merely bouncing off the creature's fur like rubber pellets. The werewolf kept coming, its claws outstretched as it zeroed in on the closest hunter. The young man barely had time to scream before the werewolf's massive paw swatted him aside, sending him crashing through the underbrush in a sickening crunch of snapping bones. The rest of the hunters scattered in a panic, continuing to pour round after round into the werewolf to no avail. It shrugged off the gunfire like it was nothing more than a mild annoyance. Jim found himself separated from the others, his back against a large oak tree as the werewolf advanced on him. He reached for another clip with a trembling hand, his rifle hopelessly empty. That's when he spotted a glint of silver protruding from the werewolf's shoulder. One of the bullets had hit bone, becoming lodged in the creature's body. An idea struck Jim like a bolt of lightning. He quickly unscrewed the silver cap from his thermos of coffee, the metal glinting in the moonlight. As the werewolf reared up, jaws agape to deliver the killing blow, Jim made his move. With a ferocious yell, he flung the contents of the thermos directly into the creature's face. The searing hot coffee splashed across its eyes and muzzle, causing the werewolf to recoil with a howl of agony. Jim seized his chance, thumbing open the chamber of his rifle and jamming the silver cap into the breech. He slammed it shut just as the werewolf regained its senses, whipping its head around to relocate its prey. Their eyes met for a split second, the hunter and the beast. Then Jim squeezed the trigger. The silver cap shot from the rifle like a molten bullet, streaking through the air towards the werewolf's face. There was a sickening crunch as it impacted the creature's left eye socket, punching through the back of its skull in a spray of gore and bone fragments. The werewolf stood upright for a moment, seeming almost confused. Then its legs gave out and it crashed to the forest floor in a heap, unmoving except for a few residual twitches. Jim let out a ragged breath, his entire body shaking from the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He looked up to see the other hunters slowly emerging from their hiding spots, their eyes wide with shock and awe. "Well, I'll be damned," the youngest hunter whispered, staring at the werewolf's corpse. "The crazy son of a bitch actually did it." As the sun began to peek over the horizon, the group gathered around the fallen creature. Its body was already starting to revert, the coarse fur receding and facial features becoming more human-like. "What do we do with him?" one of the hunters asked, nudging the corpse with his rifle barrel. "Turn him over to the authorities?" Jim shook his head, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "No sir, ain't no authority in the world gonna believe us. Best we just get old Bucky loaded up and take him out to the barrens for a proper pyre." The others murmured in agreement. As the sun rose over the Black Hills, the hunting party set about the solemn task of honoring their kill, the last of an ancient, bloodthirsty lineage that had finally met its match against the old ways. And as the years passed and those hunters grew old, they would look back on that night in the woods and wonder, had they really killed a werewolf? Or had they simply slain a man, a victim of an unspeakable curse that had finally been lifted? The truth was, they would never truly know. All they could do was raise a glass to the memory of the creature, the legend, the monster that had haunted these hills for centuries. For on that fateful night, the hunters had gone head-to-head with the werewolf. And won. The Clash of Titans. The full moon hung low over the shores of Lake Michigan, its pale light casting a silvery glow across the dark waters. A lone figure emerged from the dense forest, its hulking silhouette cutting an imposing figure against the night sky. It was a massive grizzly bear, one of the largest ever seen in these parts. The bear's thick fur gleamed in the moonlight as it lumbered down towards the lapping waves, its powerful jaws agape in a mighty yawn. It had been a long day of foraging and fishing, and the bear was ready to settle in for a well-deserved rest. But as the grizzly approached the water's edge, a low, guttural growl reached its ears. The bear froze, its senses on high alert as it scanned the tree-line for the source of the sound. Another growl, this one closer and more menacing, caused the bear to rear up on its hind legs, its massive paws at the ready. That's when it emerged, a creature straight out of nightmares. Easily 8 feet tall, covered in a matted coat of coarse gray fur, with an elongated snout filled with razor-sharp fangs. The werewolf advanced slowly, its glowing yellow eyes fixed on the grizzly with a predatory intensity. The bear let out a deafening roar, a challenge to this intruder on its territory. The werewolf answered with a howl that sent shivers down the grizzly's spine. Then it charged, closing the distance with terrifying speed. The two titans collided in a whirlwind of claws, fangs, and fur. The grizzly swiped and slashed with its massive paws, while the werewolf snapped and tore with its jaws. Blood flew as they grappled and wrestled, either willing to back down. At one point, the werewolf managed to latch onto the bear's shoulder, its fangs sinking deep into the thick muscle. The grizzly roared in pain, thrashing and slamming its attacker against the rocky shore. With a sickening crunch, the werewolf's grip was broken, its jaws hanging at an unnatural angle. But the creature barely seemed to notice, shaking off the injury and renewing its assault. The grizzly was tiring, its breath coming in ragged gasps. It knew it couldn't keep this up much longer. In a last-ditch effort, the bear reared up on its hind legs, towering over the werewolf. With a mighty swipe of its paw, it caught the creature across the face, sending it tumbling backwards. Before the werewolf could recover, the grizzly pounced, pinning it to the ground. The two beasts grappled and snapped, each trying to gain the upper hand. But as the grizzly moved in for the kill, the werewolf lashed out with a speed and ferocity that caught the bear off guard. Its claws raked across the grizzly's belly, opening deep gashes that spilled blood and entrails onto the sand. The grizzly let out a roar of agony, staggering backwards. The werewolf seized the opportunity, leaping onto the bear's back and sinking its fangs into the thick ruff of fur around its neck. The grizzly thrashed and twisted, trying in vain to dislodge its attacker, but the werewolf held on with supernatural strength. Finally, the bear's legs buckled, and it crashed to the ground. The werewolf released its grip, standing over its fallen foe with a triumphant howl. The grizzly lay motionless, its eyes glazed over in death. The werewolf had won. But the creature's victory was short-lived. The pain of its own wounds, inflicted by the bear's massive claws, began to catch up with it. The werewolf staggered, its strength fading fast. It knew it needed to recover, to regain its strength. With a final look at its vanquished foe, the werewolf turned its attention to the grizzly's carcass. Its jaws opened wide, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth as it began to feed. Tearing into the bear's flesh with savage hunger, the werewolf gorged itself on the rich, fatty meat, fueling its regenerative powers. As the first rays of dawn peeked over the horizon, the werewolf finished its meal, its belly distended, and its muzzle dripping with blood and gore. It let out a contented rumble, then turned and lumbered back into the forest, disappearing into the shadows. The grizzly's body lay motionless on the shore, its once mighty form reduced to a pile of shredded fur and broken bones. The werewolf had won, proving itself the true apex predator of this wilderness. And as it stalked through the trees, its glowing eyes scanning for its next meal, it knew that no other creature, no matter how large or fierce, would ever challenge its supremacy again. But unbeknownst to the victorious werewolf, it had not gone unnoticed. Deep in the forest, A pair of glowing amber eyes watched its every move, a low growl rumbling from the shadows. For the werewolf was not the only supernatural predator that called these woods home. Emerging from its hiding place, a massive shape materialized, a creature even larger than the werewolf, with thick gray fur and gleaming fangs. It was another werewolf, a primordial cousin of the one that had just defeated the grizzly bear, but twisted and mutated by dark forces beyond mortal comprehension. This ancient werewolf had been drawn by the sounds of the epic battle, its primal instincts sensing the clash of two powerful alpha predators. And now, with the younger werewolf weakened and distracted, it saw an opportunity to assert its own dominance. With a bone-chilling howl, the ancient werewolf charged, its massive paws thundering across the forest floor. The younger werewolf whirled around, its eyes widening in shock at the sight of this new challenger. It tried to flee, to escape back to the safety of the trees, but the ancient werewolf was faster. The two creatures collided in a whirlwind of claws and fangs, their growls and snarls echoing through the night. The younger werewolf fought with desperation, its wounds slowing its movements and sapping its strength. But the ancient werewolf was relentless, its jaws clamping down on the younger one's throat. The younger werewolf thrashed and twisted, but the ancient one held on, its powerful muscles rippling beneath its fur. Finally, with a sickening crunch, the younger werewolf's neck snapped, and its body went limp. The ancient werewolf released its grip, letting the lifeless form crumple to the ground. For a moment, the ancient werewolf stood over its kill, letting out a triumphant howl that echoed through the forest. Then, with a dismissive snort, it turned and lumbered back into the shadows, disappearing as silently as it had come. The younger werewolf's body lay motionless on the forest floor, its once fearsome form now just another meal for the scavengers that prowled these woods. The ancient werewolf had proven itself the true king of this wilderness, a primordial force of nature that answered to no other creature, living or dead. And as the sun rose over Lake Michigan, casting its golden light through the trees, the ancient werewolf watched from its hiding place, its amber eyes gleaming with a primal intelligence. For it knew that this was only the beginning, that more challenges would come, more battles to be fought and won. But the ancient werewolf was ready, its ancient instincts honed to a razor's edge. It was the apex predator, the undisputed ruler of this forest, and nothing would ever change that. Not the younger werewolf, not the grizzly bear, and certainly not any mere mortal creature that dared to cross its path. The ancient werewolf let out a low rumble, a sound that sent shivers down the spines of every living thing within earshot. Then, with a flick of its tail, it turned and melted back into the forest, leaving no trace of its passing. The Farmer's Trap. Old man Ezra had seen a lot in his 70 years of living on the same patch of hardscrabble farmland in the Ozark Hills. Droughts, floods, crop failures, even the occasional tornado, he'd weathered them all with a grizzled determination that was as much a part of him as the calluses on his hands. But nothing could have prepared him for what he encountered one moonlit night while making his rounds, checking on the livestock. As he approached the sheep pasture, he heard an unearthly howl that raised the hair on the back of his neck. Peering through the gloom, he caught a glimpse of a massive, hulking shape moving among the trees. Ezra's eyes went wide as he realized what it was: a werewolf, a creature straight out of the horror stories his grandpappy used to tell. He'd always dismissed those tales as superstitious nonsense, but now, seeing the beast with his own eyes, he knew the truth. They were real, and it was on his land. The werewolf let out another bone-chilling howl, this one closer and more menacing. Ezra's gaze snapped to the sheep pen, where his prize ram lay motionless, its throat torn out. A red haze of rage descended over the old farmer's vision. That beast had killed his best stock, and he'd be damned if he let it get away with it. Ezra hurried back to the farmhouse, grabbing his old Winchester rifle and a box of shells. He knew regular bullets wouldn't do much good against a werewolf, but he had an idea. Rummaging in the basement, he found what he was looking for: a silver candlestick, tarnished with age. He quickly melted it down and poured the molten metal into the empty shell casings, letting them cool before loading them into the rifle. Armed with his makeshift silver bullets, Ezra headed back out into the night, tracking the werewolf's massive paw prints through the mud. He followed them to a small ravine, where the creature had made its lair a crude den of twigs and leaves. Ezra took up a position behind a fallen log, rifle at the ready, and waited. It wasn't long before the werewolf returned, its massive form silhouetted against the moonlight as it approached the den. Ezra steadied his aim, his finger tightening on the trigger. But at the last moment, he hesitated. What if he missed? The beast would be alerted to his presence, and he'd only get one shot. Instead, Ezra quickly set about constructing a trap. Using the old barbed wire fencing that lined the pasture, he fashioned a sturdy snare, burying it in the dirt just outside the den's entrance. Then he retreated to his hiding spot, rifle still at the ready. The werewolf entered the den, sniffing the air suspiciously. But it seemed to dismiss the strange scent, settling down to rest. Ezra waited with bated breath, his muscles aching from the strain of holding so still. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the werewolf emerged, lumbering towards the den's entrance. Ezra's trap sprang into action, the barbed wire snapping tight around the werewolf's ankle. The creature let out a howl of pain and rage, thrashing and twisting in a futile attempt to break free. Ezra leapt from his hiding spot, rifle raised. "This is for my ram, you damn monster!" he shouted, squeezing off 3 rapid shots. The silver bullet struck the werewolf in the chest, causing it to convulse and howl even louder. But to Ezra's dismay, the wounds didn't seem to be slowing it down. Realizing he needed a more permanent solution, Ezra raced back to the farmhouse, returning with a heavy sledgehammer. He approached the thrashing werewolf cautiously, waiting for it to tire itself out. When it finally paused to catch its breath, Ezra swung the hammer with all his might, bringing it down on the creature's skull with a sickening crunch. The werewolf collapsed, motionless. Ezra stood over it, chest heaving, the sledgehammer still clutched in his gnarled hands. He'd done it, he'd killed the beast that had terrorized his farm. With a weary sigh, he began dragging the werewolf's body towards the barn, where he could keep it contained until morning. But as the first rays of dawn peeked over the horizon, Ezra's triumph turned to horror. The werewolf's body began to twitch and convulse, its bones shifting and reforming. Ezra watched in stunned disbelief as the creature's features melted and changed, until a naked human man lay in its place. The man's eyes fluttered open, and he let out a groan of pain. Ezra stared at him, his mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. The werewolf was supposed to be dead, not turning back into a man. He raised the sledgehammer, ready to finish the job, when the man spoke. "Please, help me," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. Ezra hesitated, his grip on the hammer loosening. There was something in the man's eyes, a plea for mercy that struck a chord deep within the old farmer's heart. With a heavy sigh, Ezra lowered the sledgehammer. He couldn't bring himself to kill the man, even if he was the same creature that had slaughtered his livestock. There was a part of him that understood the torment the man must be going through, to be cursed with such a terrible affliction. So instead, Ezra helped the man to his feet, supporting him as they made their way back to the farmhouse. He cleaned and bandaged the man's wounds, offering him a change of clothes and a hot meal. The man accepted gratefully, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and shame. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Ezra knew he couldn't keep the man on his property any longer. It was only a matter of time before the werewolf curse took hold again, and he couldn't risk having such a dangerous creature near his family. So he gathered up some supplies and a map, and sent the man on his way, warning him to stay off the roads and out of sight. The man thanked Ezra for his kindness, his voice thick with emotion. Then he turned and disappeared into the woods, leaving the old farmer alone with his thoughts. Ezra knew that he should feel satisfied that he had rid his farm of the werewolf menace. But instead, he felt a strange sense of loss, as if he had let something precious slip through his fingers. As the days turned into weeks, Ezra kept a wary eye on his livestock, half expecting the werewolf to return and seek revenge. But the creature never showed, and the old farmer began to wonder if he had made the right decision in letting the man go. Maybe, just maybe, there was a part of the werewolf that was still human, still capable of redemption. Only time would tell if Ezra's mercy had been misplaced. But as he sat on his porch, watching the sun set over the rolling hills, he couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. For in a world that often seemed dark and cruel, even a small act of kindness could make all the difference. The Botanist's Curse. Dr. Thomas Granger was a respected botanist at Ohio State University, known for his groundbreaking research into rare and endangered plant species. He spent most of his time in the field, trekking through dense forests and remote wilderness areas in search of new specimens to study and catalog. It was on one such expedition, deep in the heart of the Wayne National Forest, that Thomas encountered something he never could have imagined: a werewolf. He had been hiking alone at night, following a faint trail of bioluminescent mushrooms, when he heard a bone-chilling howl echo through the trees. Turning, he came face to face with a massive, hulking creature that seemed to be part wolf, part man. Before Thomas could react, the werewolf pounced, its razor-sharp fangs sinking into his shoulder. He screamed in agony as the creature's saliva burned like acid, coursing through his veins. The werewolf tossed him aside like a rag doll, then turned and disappeared into the darkness. Thomas lay there, bleeding and in shock, his mind reeling from what had just happened. He knew he needed to get help, but the pain was so intense that he could barely move. Somehow, he managed to drag himself back to his campsite and radio for rescue. The next few days were a blur as Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness in the hospital. His wound healed unnaturally fast, and he began experiencing strange symptoms: heightened senses, increased strength and agility, and vivid, disturbing dreams. But it wasn't until the next full moon that the true horror of his situation became clear. As the moon rose, Thomas felt a searing pain rip through his body. His bones began to shift and crack, his skin stretching and tearing as thick fur sprouted all over. He let out an agonized howl as his face elongated into a snout, his teeth sharpening into fangs. The transformation was agonizing, every muscle and tendon being pulled and twisted into a new shape. When it was finally over, Thomas found himself in a strange, unfamiliar body. He looked down at his paws, his mind struggling to comprehend what had happened. He was a werewolf now, cursed to transform into a beast under the light of the full moon. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks, and he let out a mournful howl that echoed through the night. In the days that followed, Thomas tried to come to terms with his new reality. He spent hours in front of the mirror, watching in fascination and horror as his body shifted back and forth between human and wolf. The transformations never got any easier, the pain always excruciating as his bones and muscles rearranged themselves. His human form became gaunt and haggard, the stress of the curse taking a heavy toll. Dark circles ringed his eyes, which had taken on a feral, predatory gleam. His once neatly trimmed beard had grown into a shaggy mane, and his fingernails had thickened into sharp claws. As a werewolf, Thomas was a towering, muscular beast with thick gray fur and glowing yellow eyes. His snout was filled with razor-sharp fangs, and his paws ended in deadly claws that could rend flesh and bone with ease. The transformation process had also heightened his senses to an almost painful degree. He could hear the faintest whispers from miles away, and smell the scent of prey on the wind. Thomas knew he was a danger to everyone around him, especially during the full moon. He began isolating himself, locking himself in his apartment, and praying that he wouldn't hurt anyone. But the wolf inside him was growing stronger with each passing day, its hunger for blood and violence becoming harder to ignore. One night, during a particularly painful transformation, Thomas snapped. The pain was too much, the wolf's howls of agony echoing through his mind. He felt his control slipping, the beast taking over. Before he knew it, he was out on the streets, stalking through the shadows in search of prey. He found it in the form of a group of late-night revelers stumbling home from the bars. Thomas watched them from the darkness, his mouth watering as he caught their scent. Then, with a savage growl, he pounced. The attack was over in seconds, the werewolf's jaws clamping down on the first victim's throat. The others tried to run, but Thomas was too fast, too strong. He tore through them with ease, his claws and fangs ripping flesh and shattering bone. When it was over, Thomas found himself standing amidst a pile of mutilated bodies, his fur matted with blood. The wolf's savage hunger had been sated, But the human part of him was horrified by what he had done. He had become a monster, a killer, and there was no going back. From that night on, Thomas knew he could never return to his old life. He was a werewolf, a creature of the night, and he would have to learn to live with that reality. He began to embrace his new nature, to revel in the power and freedom of the wolf. But even as he did so, a part of him mourned the loss of his humanity. He knew that with each transformation, each act of violence, he was losing a little bit of himself. The curse was slowly consuming him, turning him into a beast in body and mind. And so Thomas Granger, once a respected botanist, became a legend in his own right, the werewolf of Ohio, a creature of the night that stalked the streets and forests, hunting and killing without mercy. His howls echoed through the darkness, a chilling reminder of the price of the curse he had been forced to bear. As the years passed, Thomas became more and more feral, his human side fading away like a distant memory. He spent less and less time in his human form, preferring the freedom and power of the wolf. The transformations became easier, the pain less intense as his body adapted to the curse. He roamed the forests and wilderness areas of Ohio, hunting and killing anything that crossed his path. Small animals, deer, even the occasional hiker or camper, none were safe from the werewolf's savage hunger. His legend grew, whispered tales of a monstrous beast that lurked in the shadows, waiting to strike. Some said that Thomas had made a pact with the devil, that he had willingly embraced the curse in exchange for power and immortality. Others claimed that he was a victim, a man who had been bitten and transformed against his will. But the truth was, Thomas no longer cared about such things. He was the werewolf now, a force of nature that answered to no one. The human part of him had long since been buried, replaced by the primal instincts of the wolf. He lived for the hunt, for the thrill of the kill, for the taste of blood on his tongue. And so Thomas Granger, once a respected scientist, became a legend, a monster that haunted the dreams of every man, woman, and child in Ohio. His howls echoed through the night, a chilling reminder of the power of the curse that had consumed him, body and soul. The Wolf of the Chequamegon. The full moon hung low and heavy in the crisp autumn sky, casting an eerie glow over the dense forests of northern Wisconsin. I zipped up my jacket a little tighter against the chill in the air as I made my way along the narrow hiking trail, my boots crunching on the carpet of fallen leaves. I was a few miles deep into the Chequamegon National Forest, far off the beaten path and relishing the solitude. As an avid hiker and nature photographer, I often came out to these remote areas in search of the perfect shot, waiting patiently for hours to capture wildlife in its natural habitat. Tonight, however, something felt off. A strange sense of unease prickled at the back of my neck, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. The forest seemed almost unnaturally still and silent, as if even the nocturnal creatures could sense the tension hanging in the air. I pressed on, trying to shake off the irrational fear that was steadily building within me. This area was known to be home to black bears and timber wolves, but I'd encountered them before on my hikes and knew how to react. Whatever was causing this feeling of dread was something else entirely. A sudden sound, a low, guttural growl that seemed to reverberate through the very earth itself, made me freeze in my tracks. My heart pounded wildly in my chest as I slowly turned towards the source of that bone-chilling noise. There, emerging from the inky shadows between the trees, was a massive, hulking figure. At first I thought it might be a bear, but as it stepped into the pale moonlight, I felt my blood turn to ice in my veins. It stood easily 8 feet tall on its hind legs, its body a grotesque amalgamation of human and animal. Thick, coarse fur covered its muscular frame, and wicked claws extended from its elongated hands and feet. But it was the creature's face that struck the most primal chord of fear, a twisted, elongated muzzle filled with razor-sharp fangs, and eyes that burned with a feral, unholy light. A werewolf. The stuff of nightmares and campfire tales, yet here it stood before me, very much real and very much a threat. The beast let out another earth-shaking growl, its lips curling back in a snarl as it fixed me with its baleful glare. I stumbled backwards, fumbling for the hunting knife on my belt as the werewolf began to advance. "Easy now," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained terror. I don't want any trouble." As if in response, the creature reared back and unleashed a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the forest. Then, without warning, it charged, hurtling towards me with impossible speed and ferocity. I didn't have time to think, only to react. As the werewolf closed the distance between us in the span of a few heartbeats, I dove to the side, rolling across the uneven ground as its massive form sailed past me. I scrambled to my feet, gripping my knife tightly as the beast whirled around, its yellow eyes burning with fury. It let out another guttural snarl and began to stalk towards me, its movements fluid and predatory. My mind raced as I tried to formulate a plan. Running was out of the question. This creature was far too fast, and it would run me down in seconds. Fighting seemed like a losing proposition as well, but with my back against the proverbial wall, I had little choice. As the werewolf lunged, I lashed out with my knife, scoring a glancing blow across its shoulder. It recoiled with a howl of pain and rage, its eyes burning with a newfound fury. Before I could react, it swung one of its massive paws, catching me across the chest and sending me crashing to the ground. I lay there, dazed and gasping for air, as the werewolf loomed over me, its twisted maw splitting into a grotesque parody of a grin. This was it, I thought. This was how I was going to die, torn apart by the claws and fangs of a creature that shouldn't even exist. But then, something unexpected happened. A deafening roar split the night, echoing through the forest like a thunderclap. The werewolf froze, its head whipping around as another massive figure emerged from the tree-line. My eyes widened in disbelief as I took in the newcomer. It was another werewolf, even larger and more imposing than the first. Its fur was a deep, russet red, and its eyes burned with an almost otherworldly intensity. The two beasts faced each other, growling and snarling as they circled one another, their claws leaving deep gouges in the earth. The red werewolf let out another ear-splitting roar, a challenge that seemed to shake the very foundations of the forest. The first werewolf responded with a howl of its own, and then the two titans collided in a clash of fur and fangs. They grappled and tore at each other, their howls and roars echoing through the night as they fought with a savagery that defied description. I watched, transfixed, as the battle raged on, the two werewolves locked in a deadly dance of violence and bloodshed. Suddenly, the red werewolf gained the upper hand, its powerful jaws clamping down on the throat of its opponent. With a sickening crunch, it tore the other werewolf's head from its shoulders, spraying the forest floor with a fountain of black ichor. The red werewolf stood over the lifeless corpse of its fallen foe, its chest heaving as it let out a triumphant howl that seemed to shake the very heavens. Then, it turned its burning gaze towards me, and I felt my blood run cold. I scrambled backwards, my heart pounding in my throat as the massive beast advanced on me. This was it, I thought. This was how I was going to die, torn apart by the claws and fangs of a creature straight out of my worst nightmares. But as the werewolf drew closer, something strange happened. Its eyes, which had burned with such feral intensity mere moments ago, seemed to soften, taking on an almost human quality. It stopped just a few feet away from me, its massive head cocked to one side as it regarded me with an expression that almost seemed curious. Slowly, cautiously, I rose to my feet, my knife still clutched tightly in my trembling hand. The werewolf made no move to attack, simply watching me with those piercing, intelligent eyes. What are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The werewolf didn't respond, at least not in any way I could understand. It simply continued to study me, its gaze unwavering. Then, to my utter astonishment, the creature began to change. Before my very eyes, its form seemed to shift and contort, its fur receding and its features becoming more human. Within moments, the towering werewolf had been replaced by a man, a tall, powerfully built man with piercing blue eyes and a shock of fiery red hair. He regarded me with a calm, almost serene expression, as if he hadn't just been locked in a life-or-death battle with another supernatural creature. "I am many things," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "A protector, a guardian, a werewolf, as you would call it." I stared at him, my mind reeling as I tried to process what I had just witnessed. A werewolf, a real, living, breathing werewolf, stood before me, and yet he seemed almost human. How is this possible? I stammered, my grip tightening on my knife as a fresh wave of fear washed over me. The man, if he could truly be called that, regarded me with a patient expression. "There is much about this world that you do not understand," he said. "Creatures and forces that lurk just beyond the veil of human perception, hidden from your kind for centuries." He gestured to the lifeless corpse of the other werewolf, its glassy eyes staring sightlessly at the night sky. "That was a rogue, a beast driven by pure instinct and bloodlust. It is my duty, my purpose, to hunt down such creatures and protect the innocent from their wrath." I shook my head, struggling to wrap my mind around what he was telling me. "But you're a werewolf too," I said. "How can you be any different?" The man's expression hardened, and for a moment, I caught a glimpse of the feral power that lurked beneath his human facade. "I am not a mindless beast," he growled. "I am a guardian, a protector of the natural order. My kind has walked this earth for millennia, keeping the darkness at bay and ensuring that the balance is maintained." He took a step towards me, and I instinctively flinched back, my heart pounding in my chest. But there was no malice in his movements, no hint of the savage violence I had witnessed mere moments ago. "You have been granted a rare glimpse into a world that few mortals ever see," he said, his voice low and intense. "What you choose to do with this knowledge is up to you. But know this, the darkness is ever present, lurking in the shadows and preying on the unwary. And we, the Guardians, are all that stand between your kind and oblivion." With that, he turned and melted back into the shadows of the forest, leaving me to ponder the weight of his words. As I made my way back to my car, my mind was reeling from the events of that night. Part of me wanted to dismiss it all as some sort of fever dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion or fear. But deep down, I knew that what I had witnessed was all too real, a glimpse into a hidden world that existed just beyond the boundaries of human perception. A world of ancient secrets and primal forces, where the line between myth and reality had become blurred. And as I glanced over my shoulder at the looming trees, their shadows seeming to shift and writhe in the pale moonlight, I couldn't help but wonder what other mysteries might be lurking out there, just waiting to be uncovered.